A rusty old pickup was pulled over. An elderly man was taken out by two young officers and made to sit on the curb under the harsh midday sun. No one cared to ask who he was. Nearly an hour passed. Then came the sound of engines unlike anything else. And when a certain figure stepped out, the laughter stopped cold. Because it turned out, they had just crossed paths with someone far from ordinary. Welcome to NT, where everyday kindness becomes unforgettable. Let's begin this journey together. That day, the sky was clear and the sun was gentle. The kind of June morning where Route 12 shimmered like polished glass under the light. Rolling steadily along that old road through Pine Hill was a silver-gray pickup truck. It rattled slightly with every pothole. Worn with age but sturdy, like an old workhorse that had seen countless roads. The truck had the same quiet, reliable feel as its driver. Walter Dean, 83 years old, calm, neat, never in a rush for anyone. Walter wore a flannel shirt with frayed cuffs and an old baseball cap that read, Montana Airborne Unit. The stitching faded with time. There was no air conditioning in the truck, just the windows rolled down to let in the breeze and the crackling voice of the local news playing on the radio. He'd just left the hardware store with some lumber and a box of screws, materials to fix the wheelchair ramp for Mrs. Dorothy, a widow who lived 2 blocks from his house. He never asked for money, never had. But less than 2 miles from home, red and blue lights flashed behind him, one short burst of the siren. Walter glanced in the rearview mirror, took a slow breath, and guided the truck to the side of the road. 2 officers stepped out. Both were young, mid-20s, uniforms crisp, name tags gleaming in the sun. Officer Ryan West was tall and clean-cut, clearly the one in charge. Beside him, Officer Trey Nolan, shorter and quieter, but with a smirk that said plenty. Ryan tapped the hood, the metallic thump echoing in the midday heat. "This your truck, sir?" "No front plate. You aware of that?" Walter nodded slowly. "It's mine. Rear plate complies with state law." Trey rolled his eyes. "Got registration and paperwork? Or just some senior citizen excuse?" They both chuckled, the kind of laugh young men have when they think they know everything. Walter didn't laugh back. He didn't argue either. He simply reached over, opened the glove box, and handed them a neatly organized folder with both hands. A gesture shaped by decades of discipline. Ryan flipped through the documents, barely reading. "Truck so old, hard to believe it's still illegal." "Sit tight, we'll run a check." Walter didn't object. He just nodded and stayed where he was, hands resting gently on the steering wheel, like he was holding onto something steadier than time. Walter Dean wasn't the type to talk much. He never had to speak loudly to be heard. Folks in Pine Hill knew him well. White hair, always in that deep red flannel, same old cap with worn-out embroidery, Montana Airborne Unit. Every morning he drove that pickup. No speeding, no fuss, just doing what he always did, helping others. People saw him at church on Sundays, the farmers market on Tuesdays, and the Veterans Center every Thursday afternoon. No one could remember the last time he talked about his service, and if someone asked, he'd just smile and say, "That was long ago. I just build ramps now." Makes life easier for folks. That flannel shirt? He wore it nearly every day. Not because he had to, but because it felt like home. The cuff on his left sleeve was worn thin from years of resting his elbow out the window. The back had a patch sewn in from when he hoisted lumber over a fence to help rebuild a backyard for a young vet who'd lost a leg. To the 2 officers, he was just an old man in a beat-up truck. They didn't see the hands that once gripped a helicopter yoke under enemy fire. They didn't see the eyes that had guided troops through jungles with no map, only instinct and grit. They didn't know that Walter had been to places reporters never wrote about, doing things only brothers in arms would ever understand. And Walter didn't blame them. He'd met plenty of young men quick to judge, too fast to look deep. But he'd learned something. To be understood, you don't need to explain. Just live in a way that speaks for itself. So when they asked him to step out of the truck, Walter didn't hesitate. He unbuckled, opened the door, and got out. Each step was slow, not from weakness, but from caution, the kind honed by years of staying alive in places where one misstep meant death. He stood tall, eyes forward. He didn't meet their gaze, but anyone paying close attention could tell this was not a man easily shaken. Still, all Ryan and Trey saw was a skinny old guy wearing flannel in the middle of summer, driving a dented truck with no front plate. Just another situation they could wrap up in 10 minutes. But what began as a simple ID check dragged on far longer than it needed to. Ryan circled the truck, brushing his fingers along the scratches and dents. He smirked. "Looks like it came straight from a junkyard." Trey popped open the tailgate. Inside were some sheets of plywood, a well-worn toolbox, and an old canvas bag. Inside the bag, they found a handwritten thank you card, the handwriting shaky. "Thank you for fixing my steps. I can reach the garden again. Mrs. D. Armstrong." A faded letter stamped with the Department of Defense seal, a folder wrapped in plastic. Inside were copies of a Bronze Star certificate, a few black and white photos of special ops units, and a retirement letter signed by a general. Ryan raised an eyebrow as he flipped through the papers. "What's all this? Some kind of brag file?" Walter simply said, "Just memories." Trey chuckled, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "Gotta say, old man, you sure know how to tell a good story." Then came the pat-down. They asked Walter to empty his shirt and pants pockets. He pulled out a few simple things, an old leather wallet, a set of keys, and a small faded photo. 5 young soldiers standing in front of a helicopter deep in the jungle, all smiling, all but one. The man in the middle stood stiff and serious. That was Walter. Trey flipped through the wallet, pulling out a yellowed slip of paper. "What's this? Some kind of code?" Walter looked over, his expression unchanged. "Names of the men I served with. Some didn't make it. I marked them to remember." Ryan scoffed and tossed the paper back onto the truck seat with a flick of his wrist, like it was nothing more than a scrap of trash. Then they started talking about the vehicle itself. No front plate, dents, a brake light that looked dim. "This thing's not road safe. No valid registration in sight," Ryan said, clearly gearing up to issue citations. Walter stayed silent. He didn't bother explaining that his truck had a historical vehicle designation from the state, renewed every year without fail. He didn't argue. He simply stared out across the fields, toward the barn swallows skimming low over the grass, a quiet sign that the weather was about to turn. The inspection dragged on, not because there was a real issue, but because of suspicion and maybe a little pride. It wasn't a safety check anymore. It had become something else, an unnecessary trial for a man who had already given more than most could imagine. Very few knew Walter had once held the rank of lieutenant colonel in the Special Forces. He'd commanded missions so classified they were never written about, only sealed away in government archives. He'd led hostage rescues in the Middle East. He'd survived 36 hours trapped in a flooded cave in South Asia. And once, he saved his entire team by staying behind as bait, drawing fire long enough for them to escape. He was wounded, but he made it home. No one knew, because he'd never told the story, and because he never needed to. He wasn't angry at the 2 young officers for questioning his papers. He wasn't hurt when they tossed aside that list of names, the same list he carried every day, each name with a small star beside it. Each star was a friend, a life. Someone who had once stood beside him in the fire. But Walter understood something most people never learn. True service doesn't need an audience. It's measured in what you do when nobody's watching. And if you still choose to do the right thing, even when no one will ever know, then maybe, just maybe, you've left behind something that matters. The sun was climbing higher now. The shadows from the trees had shrunk away, leaving Walter alone on the curb, sitting upright, hands folded over his knees. He didn't complain. He didn't show anger. He just waited. The two officers were still in their cruiser, heads down in front of glowing screens, typing up reports and digging through vehicle records. All to verify a truck they didn't trust, simply because they didn't trust the man behind the wheel. Walter didn't change. His boots, worn down at the heel, sat flat on the pavement. His flannel shirt had a little dust on it from the truck bed. He didn't glance around. He looked forward, toward the road that led home, where a tired old porch waited, where a loyal dog would be lying in the shade, and where a promise still sat unfulfilled, to fix Mrs. Dorothy's ramp before dinner. Cars passed by. Some slowed, looked at him, then drove on. A teenager on a bike stopped, took a photo, then sped off. Someone in a passing car rolled down the window and muttered, "Probably doesn't even have a license, poor old guy." Walter heard them, but he didn't respond. This wasn't the first time he'd been misunderstood, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Almost an hour had passed since they pulled him over. The wind began to shift. Swallows dipped lower across the fields, like they could sense that something was about to change. The first sound was vague, just a distant hum, almost like wind. But seconds later, it deepened, became louder, more rhythmic. Military engines. Not the whine of police cruisers. Not the groan of a delivery truck. This sound was low, powerful, and deliberate, like the heartbeat of a team that had moved together through many battles. A convoy of 4 military vehicles turned onto Route 12, moving slow and steady through downtown Pine Hill. In the lead, a sand-colored Humvee. Behind it, 3 black SUVs with government plates and tinted windows. They were returning to Fort Huxley from a memorial service at the National Cemetery. They weren't planning to stop. But then, someone noticed. In the second SUV, Brigadier General Naomi Rhodes looked out the window. Her eyes caught something. A gray-haired man sitting alone on the curb beside a beat-up old pickup. 2 young officers standing over him. No weapons drawn, no shouting. But there was something off. Something in the posture, the imbalance of dignity. Rhodes leaned forward, pointed, "Stop the convoy. Back up. I need a closer look." The SUV slowed, reversed a few yards. Rhodes narrowed her eyes, then rolled down the window, and in that moment her entire face changed. From calm observation to sudden, stunned recognition. She didn't need to check twice. She knew exactly who that man was. "Oh my God, it's him," General Rhodes whispered. The officer seated beside her leaned forward. "Who, ma'am?" "Walter Dean. He pulled me and my entire unit out of a swamp in East Africa back in '93. I still have the hand-drawn map he made that day." She didn't need to say another word. General Rhodes opened the SUV door and stepped out. The door swung wide, and her polished boots hit the hot pavement with a sharp finality. Heads turned. On a quiet street in a small town like Pine Hill, the sight of a 4-star general stepping into the middle of a traffic stop wasn't exactly routine. Officers Ryan and Trey immediately straightened up. Their instincts told them to take a step back. That uniform, that posture, that face, sharp as a bayonet. They didn't know what was coming, but something in the air told them this was no longer just a simple stop. This was about to be written into the town's memory. General Rhodes didn't rush. She stood still for a moment, gazing at Walter Dean, still sitting quietly on the curb beneath the afternoon sun. Then, without hesitation, she began walking toward the officers. Her steps were calm but commanding, the kind you only see from someone who has walked through mortar fire and kept moving. Ryan started to speak. "Ma'am, this is an active traffic stop," but Rhodes cut him off. voice low but firm enough to quiet the entire street. Which of you stopped him? There was a pause. Then Ryan spoke. I did, ma'am. He had no front plate, and the vehicle looked irregular. Rhodes stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. Thank you for your honesty. Now listen carefully. She turned and pointed to Walter, still sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, sunlight catching in his white hair like silver thread. That man saved my life. Nobody spoke. Somalia, March 1993. My unit was surrounded in a swamp. Terrain was hell. No one thought we'd make it out. But Walter Dean, led a small team through enemy lines, crossed a river, dodged landmines, carried us out, one by one. Trey glanced at Walter. And for the first time, he didn't see just an old man in a flannel shirt and a rusty truck. He saw a piece of something much bigger than himself, Rhodes continued. We weren't in the same unit, not even the same command. He wasn't assigned to save us, but he came anyway, quietly, never asked for recognition. And today, I'm done keeping quiet. People had begun to gather along the sidewalk. They didn't know the full story yet, but they could feel it. This wasn't an ordinary moment. This was a man finally being honored. Not on a stage or in a ceremony, but right where he had once been quietly ignored. Rhodes lowered her head in respect, then walked up to Walter. Lieutenant Colonel Dean? I'm Rhodes. That day you saved me. I owe you my life. Walter slowly rose to his feet. No one helped him. His back was still straight, though his shoulders trembled slightly, but his eyes, they were steady, like they'd always been. I remember, he said. You were the one with the leg wound. Still got the scar? Rhodes smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Still got it, and the gratitude, too. By now the growing crowd understood. This wasn't about a missing license plate. The man who'd been sitting under the sun for an hour wasn't a problem to solve. He was someone they should have recognized all along. General Rhodes turned to the officers again. Walter looked over at them too, voice calm, even gentle. I don't blame you. I've met plenty of folks who didn't recognize me, but here's what I always hope. Next time, start with respect. The energy on Main Street had changed. The military SUVs remained still on the roadside, but more and more people had gathered. Some held up phones to record. Others just stood quietly, realizing they were witnessing something rare. A quiet hero finally being seen. General Rhodes faced Ryan and Trey. Her expression was firm, but not angry. It was the look of someone who had earned the right to teach. Do you know what you just did? She asked. The two officers exchanged a glance. Neither answered at first. Finally, Ryan spoke. We were just following protocol. Rhodes didn't raise her voice, but it sharpened. Protocol can't replace judgment, and judgment doesn't work without respect. She turned to a nearby aide and gestured. The officer promptly returned carrying a thick leather-bound folder sealed with the insignia of the Department of Defense. This is Walter Dean's service record, General Rhodes said, holding up the thick leather-bound folder. Just the declassified version. The rest is sealed until 2070. I suggest you both read it thoroughly before your shift ends. Trey accepted the file with both hands, like he was holding something far heavier than paper. Just then, Walter stepped forward. He wasn't tall, he wasn't imposing, but there was a weight to his presence that didn't need volume. His voice remained calm. You two aren't the first to look at me and get it wrong, and I won't be the last person that ever gets looked over. But the difference is, will you learn something from it? Ryan, the officer who'd led the stop, now had his head down, his legs slightly shaky. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know. Walter gave a quiet nod. That's the thing, son. You didn't know. But you didn't ask. The crowd began to applaud softly. Some wiped away tears. An elderly woman stepped forward. "Mr. Dean is the one who fixed my porch stairs after the storm last year. He wouldn't take a dime." A teenager spoke next nervously. "He taught me how to build a fire at scout camp." One by one, voices added to the picture, like brushstrokes on a canvas. It became clear. Walter Dean wasn't just a veteran, he was the quiet backbone of an entire town. The next morning, Pine Hill's local newspaper ran the headline, "Veteran Mistaken General Returns to Set Things Right." By midday, the story had spread across local news channels. Within a week, the cell phone video showing General Rhodes saying, "That man saved my life," had over 3 million views. Even the Pine Hill Police Department changed. The precinct commander came to Walter's home in person to apologize and to invite him to help design a new training program. At first, Walter declined, but later he agreed on one condition: "I won't lecture. I'll just tell stories, and the young ones can take from them what they need." And as for Officer Ryan West, he didn't quit. He didn't run. Instead, every weekend he showed up at the local VFW hall. No big words, no explanations, just a quiet presence, helping clean up, bringing coffee, holding the door. At first, the veterans looked at him with suspicion, but Walter was the first to nod and let him sit, and that made all the difference. From there, Ryan slowly became part of something deeper, the kind of learning that doesn't come from a manual, the kind you earn by showing up, listening, and meaning it. That fall, General Rhodes returned. No motorcade, no fanfare, just two old soldiers sitting on a wooden porch, watching the leaves fall and sipping whiskey in silence. She asked, "Do you think you've changed anything, Walter?" He smiled faintly, tapping his glass. "I didn't change them. They saw something and changed themselves. That's the part that makes me happiest." Walter Dean never asked for thanks. He never wrote a memoir, never expected a medal or a statue. He just lived. True to a promise he made over 60 years ago, "I will serve, uniform or not." His story reminds us, honor doesn't need a spotlight. Greatness often wears flannel, and respect should come first, not after you find out who someone is. Maybe today you'll walk past an older man in a dusty truck or a woman pushing a cart down the sidewalk. You won't know their past. But you can choose to show respect, to listen before judging. And sometimes a single kind glance is enough to make someone feel seen. Do you agree that respect should come first, not last? Leave one word in the comments. Honor, if this story touched something in you. If you believe stories have the power to change the way we see the world, hit subscribe, share this story, and join us in spreading what matters. At Into Amazing Stories, we believe the kindest things deserve to be told, because sometimes the quietest heroes leave the loudest echoes.